Aaron, thank you so much for the work that you do in the world, who you are as a human being, and for agreeing to letting us show and bring Dark and Tender, the Big Island edition, to Albuquerque, New Mexico for our partnership celebrating Black history with the Kellogg Foundation and Explora, as well as Fusion, which is where we're going to be hosting it. And we really appreciate it. And also, it's a really crucial conversation that we're super excited to have with you today. The first question I have for you is, consider maybe the audience has never met you, never heard anything about it, even though we've been promoting and putting out the trailer and all of that. Let's pretend that they didn't haven't seen any of that. What do you want them to know about you first? And and as also, what do you want them to know about the Cut Project and Dark and Tender?
Yeah, I think about myself, which feels really nice to set up the rest of those two other pieces, is that I got pretty clear probably about 10 years ago that I was going to have a tender, vulnerable, public part of myself, and that I would not let the culture at large uh, dictate or smother or harden me. And in that commitment, allowed Dark and Tender, allowed the Cut Project to really emerge from my heart more than my brain. And the Cut Project, or the actual name, is chronically undertouched. The reason we look at that chronic undertouched narrative is that it's unfortunately invasive to probably all kinds of identities in America. My kind of general umbrella is, if you're breathing and alive in America, you're probably somewhere on the spectrum of being chronically undertouched. But Dark and Tender allows us to really think about folks that are particularly targeted, particularly difficult amongst the undertouched, are oftentimes missed or miscategorized as okay or not needed. And that is particularly Black cis men and Black men, not just cis, but we notice that cis men have a particular narrative that we have to hold. So the Cut Project is that extension of my heart to help me and now us uh, build practices, multiple practices that bring us from a chronically undertouched state to a touch balance, is the words that we use. Dark and Tender, and particularly the Big Island, is evidence, a little bit of practice. How do we do it? What did we do? Even though it doesn't share a lot of the background work that still took place, it's a lot more available to the audience of the step-by-step actual workshop, actual how brothers go from not touching to touching, and the amount of preparation or timing or my style of helping us get there. And I think there's a way that if someone is exposed to cuddling or touching, it might seem unimpressive. But if one is exposed to oppression and what America does and continues to put effort into to Black men, they will understand how important every minute of this film is, both films and particularly this film, because of the practice of Dark and Tender, the practice of being dark in this culture and being tender in this culture do oftentimes go together. And so in that spirit, that's the kind of both of those projects emerge from that tender place. There is a resilience, there is a toughness, there is a creativity attached to this, but this is really about centering the tender parts of our hearts and holding it up regardless. That's what these projects are really about.
I think one thing that's really incredible about watching the movie and knowing you is this idea of vulnerability as a superpower and how to create it amongst oppression and repression, and how to claim that as a superpower and also as a community practice to do together. Shared vulnerability is really incredible in the film, and it gives me goosebumps every time I watch it because of the humanity that is on display, that I believe speaks truth to the actual like is a talk back to white supremacy? Is a talk back to colonialism? Is a talk back to transphobia? It's a talk back to the stories like you talk about, right? Of what these bodies mean and what the actual experience is of that. So I wondered if you wanted to talk about that a little bit more.
Completely. I think one of the things I think about when it comes to how I'm originally postured towards oppression is to be hard, strong, and almost willing to any means necessary to liberate my people. And that's true. That's important to have. But the temperament and rhythm of this work and how we talk back to bigger culture is not being as intense around aggression and just letting it's interesting because the tenderness of the black men and the tenderness of my work lands violently on oppression. Like when white folks that have a belief of black bodies, have a belief of black culture, have a belief of how we can be, when they see this tenderness, it lands intensely on their system. Like, what is this? The discomfort is so in their space to see, oh my goodness, these brothers are human. And there's something about that talk back that I'm curious how this scales as we get deeper into mainstream culture and we penetrate some of these unwavering institutions of black male violence that are just normalized. They aren't even looked at as um, a problem. Uh, and to really start a conversation of like saying like, what kinds of conversations can we have now? And I think the timing is eerily beautiful in this very uncertain time with artificial intelligence taking such a hold of our culture. This is a part of humaning that takes humans. Like it's not, we can't replace each other's hearts, right? We need to have humans for humans. And so I think for me, the talkback feels like it's a reclaiming. And I like the idea that we're not speaking that explicitly, but it's implied, and I want to explicitly here, is that we are reclaiming our humanity. This is not like we had this prior to colonization, prior to slavery, prior to all these violations of our identities here in the United States and before. We had access to all these things. And oftentimes, you go back to some of our unmolested villages, we're hands on. We are singing, we're intact with the earth, and we are touching each other. It is a part of who we are. So in the talkback, it's just interesting to see how intense, how violent tenderness is received to the system. And I appreciate that, but it's something I'm not used to, even though I've been doing this for almost 10 years and publicly in this particular intensity for the last 2 years. It still is amazing how people come almost shocked and violated by seeing tender black men be tender platonically. It's so intriguing of folks that are like, I wasn't ready for that. Like, oh. You would think someone's being slowly tortured on camera. No, it's not what's happening. It is simply tenderness on display in black bodies and listening and music and rest.
It's amazing the radical nature of the simplicity and really how people respond to the disruption in the story that they have. Right. And I think that's true for all of the folks in the part that participate in the singing circle with you, in Dark and Tender, in the Cut Project, in the Touch activism, and all of those kinds of things. And so it's just really powerful. And it's really an honor to be able to show this practice as an option to the Black community in Albuquerque. It's very tiny
Yes.
here. It's very tiny here,
Yes.
and but it's still important, right? Even, and so I really appreciate that. And I think my last question for you is really about narrative sovereignty and the power, because you clearly understand the importance of talkback and reclaiming and claiming your own story, right? And narrative sovereignty is the kinds of documentaries we show. We don't show documentaries that are shot by people that are outside the lived experience that's being documented. It's the people behind the camera and in front of the camera have this shared lived experience. That's important to us because it lends to an authentic storytelling. And it's not part of that colonial view or colonial practice that occurs a lot with documentary, where somebody flies in from outside the anthropological, kind of vibe of the history of documentary. We're trying to interrupt that as well. Similar to how you're interrupting certain stories, we're interrupting what documentary film is and should be and can be. So I would love to hear what you think, what your take is on narrative sovereignty.
Oh, I would love that. And I just want to speak to the small desert community you are, because I am from a small desert community and it's not a ton of Black folks where I live. And I just want to name, like, I am in deep solidarity with you all in a very intimate way because I come from feeling Californian. So I will celebrate you all 4, 5, 10, 15, whatever the number is, that y'all's voice matters, because that's where my voice was here in the desert when I birthed this project. So this is a project that feels, I feel very kin to my desert people, because there's a way that people disrespect the desert and the beauty and the magic of it. And I'm in love with that. So that's when I give my Black folks and people who majority in small desert towns mad love, because of where this came from, the origin story of this. But speaking about narrative sovereignty, I had the privilege of growing up in a small, low income Black community that was doing high magic in music, high magic in speaking communication. I got some of the best speaking training one can get in this country from my mother and church and, community members. And I constantly recognized how cinema was profoundly powerful. Telling story with visual is very powerful, but oftentimes was expensive. Now, when I first got exposed to film, a film camera was thousands and thousands of dollars to get a good, decent camera to shoot a film. The iPhone and the technology nowadays wasn't accessible in like early 2000s and late 90s and even like the first 10 years of 2000s, like 2001 to 10, it wasn't like you could get a cell phone quality, iPhone quality now today, 4K, whatever. That's ridiculous. For free. It's like an addition to your phone. So without that being there, it's hard to make and distribute a narrative without having thousands of dollars in investment, just having the camera, let alone the time off to tell the story. So I was aware of that, and I got the gift of attending as a student at CalArts. I graduated in 2008 from CalArts, and what's important at CalArts is it's a very bougie school. I mean, it's hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to that school. It's in a bougie neighborhood. There's something dusty about the school because it's kind of part of their brand, but there a lot of wealthy people go there. And the reason I say that is I'm feeling it. I'm exposed to big wealth and big resource and big storytelling. They're very independent, inspired school as far as like your story, but it's the first time I saw the theft of people with low majority story. How commonly big money, big studios, wealthy folks will come in and tell a novel story about a person or people of a global majority and make millions, win awards and accolades off of their story and give nothing back to that community and move on to the next community. And this happens in droves, from National Geographic to Discovery Channel to you name it, these ecosystems that feel like they're telling these stories that exploit the people because they have a budget and they control these places. So in that, I felt really clear that Dark and Tender easily could have been picked up and probably still will get, copied and borrowed once, momentum gets in the world, that someone would turn this into some kind of Survivor 2.0, hypersexualizing Black bodies, making it more, um, fetishizing the Black body and dribbling some context around touch, but making it more an erotic exploitation of Black bodies, which is easy to do. It's like what America is, we do that without even flinching. And so for me, it was important that when I decided I was going to write a book, I was going to write a book on this film. I was not. I need to make a movie first. I need people to see this. I need to have evidence of it. And so for me, I want to speak to every filmmaker, storyteller, now more than ever. It is more important to practice telling your story from you. It's complicated sometimes as distributed film to into the world, but all means necessary. Control your narrative of your film. And for us to independently release this film, I'm so grateful that we got some nibbles from bigger ecosystems, but I really opted to keeping this film in house. And I probably will do the same thing for the feature film. If someone does buy it, it'll be very careful about who I sell it to because I think it's important that this film stays intact energetically and lineage wise. There are some good folks that would really, just like this film and do justice by it. But I think there's something important to note that we live in an era that we can self distribute, we can spread the word, and we can independently let people hear. And I think people are more hungry now than ever for real independent material because these voices and theaters are being erased off the planet. People are getting more hungry for it. We thought records and cassette tapes were gone, and their comeback is phenomenal. I went into Barnes and Noble just the other day, and it was records everywhere. Everyone's buying record players and records because they understand the value of not having it, attached to Spotify or not attached to the bigger streamers that can care less about the musicians. And so for us, I think it's the same way for controlling your narrative. I feel committed to that. And this is a story that easily could be taken over or opted into a reality TV show of some sort and miss the magic and the potencies of it. So I love the fact that the birth of this film in my heart and now the finished product of the 18-minute short film and 25-minute second film um, really is exactly what I desire and more. Actually, it's actually exceeded what I had initially in my heart. And so, in that, the narrative control is it's easier for this project. This project is not trying to make a financial profit. This project is built to support a movement. So it is a little bit of a gift in that way that we can really move it in that way. And if you have a project that needs to make its money, I still would encourage you all to, and encourage myself in the same narrative, is not making sure you work on your money material before you go out and distribute your film with the film festivals, because it's a way that if you have been struggling to make a film and you maybe grew up like I have, grew up poor, there's a way that people can exploit that part of our energy field. And so I think part of having, you know, your sovereignty around, your narrative not is doing the work around money and how it moves through your body and how it moves around you. Not to be afraid of it, but not let it be um, a way that you can be leveraged or taken advantage of. That's one of the first cards that are played when it comes to taking people's story is the illusion or the idea of a little bit of cash flow to steal your story and make again more capital on top of your magic. So that's one of the things I would say is important, and I'm so glad that I did grow up or I did go to school in a place where a lot of my professors and students really, really invested in us having our own voice. I do appreciate that about CalArts. It's as big as the back end of the economics of that school is the front end artists that were attending my school when I went there really celebrated independent voice.
Thank you. I guess I do have one more question, which is in the film you talk about being out of your depth, like, right? And so I'm
Yeah.
wondering, um, given all of this, and also, as someone who also grew up poor and unhoused, like difficult in these environments, these film festival environments, and these places. Like I went to a liberal arts school too, with a lot of rich kids in New York, right, for undergrad as well. And so anyway, like I'm thinking about how to maintain that, like how to regulate your nervous system when you're in those environments. And like it's a different form of being out of depth. And then also how that can impact the work, right? And if you wanted to speak to that in any way, and then if there was an evolution from where you were like, I'm doing it anyway. I'm like underwater, fully submerged. I'm doing it anyway. And how was that for you if you wanted to speak to either of those two things or both of them?
No, I remember the editing of that film. We were talking about editing, and he had cut that part out of the film initially. We were going back and forth, and I was like, "No, yeah, put it in there. It's actually important because um, I don't want the illusion that because I birthed this idea and I'm facilitating this work, that I have this all figured out. Um, I am in clear need and will probably continue the rest of my living life of the collective mind to help completely move the dial on the chronic and untouched Black bodied America. I think I have a bright, creative, skillful mind. I think it's going to do a lot of contribution, but it can't do it alone. And I think one of the things that modern day um, capitalism culture has done is it's fragmented us from each other. And as a facilitator, I consider myself a really skilled facilitator. I've done it for years. One of the things I've done probably the most of in the last 20 years is facilitate. Is that most of the time you would facilitate, you would be qualified to do the fill in the blank task. But some of your best work, some of our best work, some of my best work has been able to allow me to step out of the pulpit or the pedestal of a facilitator and say, I need these brothers to commit with me to help me lead this work. I need us all to contribute to moving this project forward, to moving this workshop week forward. And there's a humbleness that has to be given up, not just like one time, but continuously through the process, combined with the confidence and a commitment and the skill set to also set a container that allows that level of humility to exist and not be overran by strong personalities. That room was full of executive energies, some very good leaders. So if I didn't come in there with some clarity, there's a dance there. So I just want to be clear that being out of my depth was such a lesson, as still is. And I probably will stay out of my depth for a while before I feel like I got to handle this work because we still need to grow the critical mass of these brothers that are putting collective perspective and group into it. Like a group think needs to happen in this project. This is a group activity. And so I think for me, that's something that's really essential to being able to speak to that moment in the film where I acknowledged how out of depth I was just by a sample of it. And I think people have a hard time really grasping because I say it quickly. You might even pick it up while watching it, but noticing the classes, the class, gender, and cultural background shifts that we had in that room. We had brothers in that room that were, retired executives. We had people in that room that were like, I need a shelter next week. We had brothers in that room that were trans identified and also like mixed heritage as well and overexposed to whiteness and underexposed to blackness, but yet black people themselves and brothers that were almost exclusively exposed to blackness. And so these are, it's as a facilitator, when I look on paper, I can't help but sweat and cry and get excited about what we're up against. At the same time, I think it's important to really um, just hear it now in this moment, understand what I'm speaking to when I said I'm out of my depth. It was so many layers that are probably it's kind of almost I would say grazed over, but less than a half hour, it's hard to get the depth. It could be a half hour on one of those characters in that movie, not 10. So in that narrative, I think that's part of it. To transit to your second part of your question around grounding yourself around class, this is no joke. I mean, this is being a class jumper, like working in folks that are in a deep in poverty, and then maybe the next week in someone that has so much wealth they don't know what to do with in the same week. It has a nervous system impact. And what I will say is that for me, and I think those that have done similar work, when I say work on your money and resource material, I think there's actual ceremony, there's actual community, there's actual grief ceremony to shake off the not to guilt people for pooping in water, right? I have a couple of water toilets on our property here, but I just want to name that I had to do some serious examination and contract that I pee and poop in America commonly in clean drinking water. It feels normal to anybody that has the privilege of growing up in the United States to do that on a daily basis. And outside this country, in most of the world, that is crazy talk. It doesn't even make sense to poop and pee in clean drinking water. But we have so much abundance and we function at level of just like clean water. And that way I see the example not to go back to like the 90s, like, you know, exploitive, infomercials about helping folks in poverty places. I'm saying it because part of shaking off your resource is being able to acknowledge even in my poverty here in the United States, what needs to move? What do I take for granted? What do I strive for? Who told me I'm actually poor? What does poor actually mean? Right. And so for me, I I was tracking housing, for example, and I love natural housing, Super Adobe, Cobb, all those, and I have a couple of small domes that I lived most of like the last 10 years, half the time in an earth dome that was 13 feet by 15 feet. And I realized not just the size, but just tracking that most standard American homes are full of so much toxins and plastic and are difficult to keep warm, difficult to keep from molding, depending on what you are in the country. It's a headache on multiple levels. And no one thinks about it. We just like accept the dysfunction of these homes. And so in the context of just living, you might be in a 9-foot dome and have a much higher quality of life and quality and exposure because you're not in a bougie plastic carpeted, whatever plastic house. Not really spec we had living with live. I've lived in apartments. I've lived in all kinds of different environments. So I just named that I've had to get close to the earth, literally isolated in the desert, close to the earth, to not to start to see where I was cultured. I was shaped around wanting more plastic, more uh, standard American living. And I think minimalism has been a project I'm still working on. I'm like a constant journey on that. But minimalism has been one of my foundation ways that I have been able to birth holistic resistance, make this film, is because I have lived very small. And that was one of the best choices I made 20 years ago, is to say, I'm going to downscale my life to upscale my magic. If I would have not done that, none of the projects I have would have became to like. So for me, that's a big part of it, is to encourage people to um, experiment with shaking off the norms of American trappings at the poverty level, middle class and upper class level, but specifically to us lower middle and lower class folks, to really know what it feels like to really bring actual value to your housing, actual value to your life, and not the rent stuff, the tax stuff, the stuff that really gets in the way of that. I think for me, that's the part that um, is profound for my whole creative process, that didn't get sucked in to standard, expensive capitalism. And still shaking it off, but I shook off enough to stay in a minimal container.
I think that's a really amazing perspective in terms of, because what I love about you is the practice. It's not just the theory. It's like everything is a conscious practice in your life, and that's just another example of that.
Right.
It's inspiring, and it's like reminding me to do more self-reflection even, and I think it will remind our audience as well about, like, what is it that I really need? Why do I think I want these things? How can I really be conscious about how I participate within the capitalist structure? And where can I push back against that participation and carve out other ways of being, right? And so it's one thing to do it in certain areas of your life, but how do you make it more whole,
Mm-hmm.
as like and more integrated into every moment? And that's it's set up to make that feel really impossible. And when we connect with each other, we're reminded that it's actually possible, and that people are doing it all over the world and the globe, and have been for, this is the norm in reality. We're just stuck in the toxic nightmare of capitalism. So anyway, that was, yeah, that was amazing. I don't have any more for you. If there's anything else you want to say, or any other questions you have, now is the time.
I'm just grateful that you are doing this. We pulled this off, and thank you for your resilience and reaching out, and getting it done. So I love that you pushed across the finish line, and we got it up this month, and y'all get to see it. So just honored that you are watching this, and looking forward to seeing you all's hearts and minds on the other end of it, of the screen.